Welcome to the Bail in the Midwest podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Bail in the Midwest podcast, where we explore a variety of topics related to bail, pretrial release, and the criminal justice system in the Midwest. My name is Shane Rolf. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Kansas Bail Agents Association, and I've worked in this field for the past 35 years. Now, it's an old adage that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I used to hear this from my mother when I told her that I had meant to do something that I had clearly not completed, like, say, clean my room while she was gone. But a more common take on this old saying is when it runs up against the law of unintended consequences. That is, you believe that you have good intentions, but there are unintended consequences from your actions that result in negative outcomes, which then paves the way to hell. In the 1930s, at the beginning of the age of sociology, when we thought we could scientifically sort out everything through some pervasive theory, or what we might now refer to as an algorithm, an American sociologist named Robert Merton wrote a paper titled The Unanticipated Consequences of Purposive Social Action. Nice, flowery 1930s language. But in that, he identifies various reasons for what he called unanticipated consequences. The first two reasons are pretty basic: ignorance and error. Put simply, the policy was wrong from the get-go. The third reason he gives, I think, fits very well with many of the failures of public policy that we see today. He describes this third reason as the imperious immediacy of interest. By that, he was referring to instances in which someone wants the intended consequences of an action so much that he or she purposely chooses to ignore any obvious negative effects likely to be the result of the policy, essentially distinguishing willful ignorance from simple ignorance, which then brings us to bail reform and the willful ignorance of policymakers who have hitched their wagon to this falling star. My guest today has been sorting out the consequences, both intended and unintended, of bail reform for a number of years. He has recently published an article in Attorney at Law magazine titled The Four Phases of the Spiral of Death Facing Our Nation's Largest Cities. Ken Good is an attorney himself, a graduate of the Texas Tech School of Law, and we here in Kansas City thank Texas Tech for Patrick Mahomes. He is also on the board of directors of the Professional Bondsmen of Texas and hosts a podcast called The Bail Post, where he discusses bail-related issues. You should definitely check that out. Ken, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, and you're welcome for Patrick Mahomes. But if I was going to speak honestly, I think I was there for 3 years, and I attended one quarter of one football game. So I really wasn't into sports probably until Patrick Mahomes hit the National Football League, and I am a pretty big Patrick Mahomes fan now.
Yeah, my son was the same way at KU. He never attended a basketball game, but he went to the School of Engineering, and he was always complaining that the stadium was right next to the School of Engineering, so they would take up all the parking on nights that he had to go study, so he had to find an alternate way to get there.
Yeah, I was a big nerd. I always have been a big nerd. Everything technical is great. I'm not really sports related. I was big into basketball when I was in high school, but kind of awkward. And, in a family of athletes, that's not a good thing because my brother could beat me at everything growing up except chess. And I don't know if that's something to brag about.
Chess is a good game. We used to play when my dad and I, when I was a kid. So as an attorney, and most of the people up in my area, they're not attorneys that are involved in bail. So how did you become involved in what I also often loosely refer to as bail world? What's your background here?
Well, in law school, I had an interest in appellate work. So I was on some national teams. I wrote a brief with some other people that was selected as the best brief in the nation in the competition. So wow. I've always, my competitive streak for my family kind of came out in law school. And when I first became an attorney, I was working for a law firm and for an attorney who specialized in medical malpractice, representing doctors and hospitals. And we had a really good team. And I continued my interest in appellate work. So we would go to a seminar on medical malpractice cases, and they would have a section of important new cases from the courts of appeals. And like 4 of the 6 or 8 cases were mine. And so we had a lot of success. We were even on court TV on a case. And I was always considered the law guy. Well, a bondsman had 45 default judgments, and he called some friends. Yeah, as you can imagine, that would freak a bondsman out. And he said, "Who do I need to hire to do this?" And so they said, "You need an appellate attorney." And I've got a good one. So they suggested that he call me. And for some reason, I just hit it off with the bail industry. I think we have similar values. I feel like I have a blue collar background, blue collar values, which is just you work hard, you take care of things, and you will have success. And so we got his 45 default judgments set aside. And as a result of that, just word of mouth, I started representing bondsmen. I became Texas counsel for several carriers. I am on the board of directors of the Professional Bondsmen of Texas. Now I specialize in bail law. I represent bondsmen across the state, and I appear at the legislature to testify on bail issues. And as you've noted, I have now written a lot of articles. We've had this bail reform arise, and we in Texas, we discovered that if we didn't become experts on these issues, there was no one that was going to tell the real truth, the real story. They were always going to be colored, or it was the facts were always going to be tilted to whatever their agenda was. And so, as a result of the O'Donnell case, I went to a hearing and I came out going, this case just went to pot. And I started calling everybody and saying, we got to become experts on these issues. And so that's what I tried to do. I think, I tried to become an expert on these types of issues, writing articles, pointing out when people take positions, and then trying to hold them accountable. And, I've probably been criticized by the Right on Crime group because they're considered a right-wing think tank on issues. But, they've sided with the left on a bunch of issues, including, California's decriminalization of theft over $950. And I've pointed that out, and, they just kind of want to forget their mistakes and not let anybody talk about it. So that, but that's what I think we have to do, is we have to point out the people you're listening to today made calls yesterday that have come back and bitten other states. And do you really want to listen to them and have it come back and bite you as well?
Well, and it is a very specialized area of law, even just at the basic level of fighting or challenging motions for judgment on bond or attempts to collect bonds. Most lawyers don't know anything about it. And so, I last year at our continuing education, I put on an hour-long talk about how to handle motions for judgment on bond. But one of the caveats there was, if you weren't comfortable doing this, get a lawyer who knows bail, because most lawyers don't. I've had lawyers call me and go, okay, I've got this signature bond that they're trying to take a judgment on. What do I do from here? It's like, no, I'm not a lawyer. You're supposed to know how to do this. But it's very specific. There's not a huge body of case law, particularly not in Kansas, on that to narrow down how that's supposed to work. So it really is important to have, probably more than one attorney in a state who knows exactly what they're doing on this.
Well, Texas is a big state, and we really have only 3 attorneys who have statewide reputations on bail. There are a couple of others that do bail, but there's only 3 attorneys that I believe have a statewide reputation on these issues. And so I agree with you. It is very specialized. On the issue of bond forfeitures, I like the hard issues. I don't know why, I always have, but I developed my own little software system so that you can enter a forfeiture on it. It automatically spits out and tells you when your rearrest deadline is. It generates an answer. It also does so many things automatically. So we enter a hearing, it sends you an email. You got a hearing scheduled for this date. And so it's generated by somebody created by somebody who knows bail and understands bail. And I think I couldn't function without it, because I file on average 40 something documents a day by using that system.
Oh, wow.
And it's a great time saving. And because the bond forfeiture in Texas, if you're doing it correctly, it's just a big paper shuffle. You're getting your proposed judgments for court costs because you got them rearrested. You're getting them signed and returned, and you're making sure no full judgments slip through. And if they do, what do you do to fix it, and making sure it gets done? And, so to me, it's a big paper shuffle, but it's so much personal relationships, because you're going to make mistakes. We all make mistakes. So everybody knows everybody. You can call, hey, this is the bond forfeiture person in Tarrant County. You talk to them. Oh yeah, this was a mistake. Let's get it corrected. Or, it's just so much who and they know that they can trust me. And if I tell them something, they usually know that I'm not going to lie to them. And so I've worked 30 years to get that reputation. And you know, just like I do, that us lowly bondsmen and lowly bondsmen's attorneys, it doesn't take, being caught lying one time and you've destroyed your reputation. So you want to be very careful with that.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about your article here a little bit. I started the preamble with a discussion of unintended consequences, and I'll give the bail reformers the benefit of the doubt and assume that their goal is not the destruction of the American criminal justice system. I think you can make an argument that it is, but we'll assume for purposes now that that's not the intent. So in the vein of know your enemy as you know yourself, where are the bail reformers coming from on this? What's their argument for these,
Well, I would say let's start with that it's a coalition. And I think part of the coalition is exactly what you say, that it is the true believers. They just want to do good. But I think there's another part of the coalition that I think you can rightfully attach to them a wrongful intent. They want to create chaos. They want to decriminalize crime. And so I don't think it's wrong to say that there is a part of the coalition that has goals that we would not agree with, and that their own other supporters would not agree with. But I think, if you want to say, where do I think they're coming from? I think you have to go back multiple election cycles and you go, hey, we have one side of the electorate that, the politicians would take an issue 6 months before an election and they would use it to cause protests. Some people would call them riots, and they would say, you minority group are being mistreated by the criminal justice system, and you need to come out and get angry, and you need to come and vote, and you need to vote for us. And then as soon as the election was over, it would go back to business as usual. And so I think after a few election cycles, those people started seeing that. And so they started electing what I would call the true believers. And I think some of them really want to destroy the criminal justice system. We had a judge elected in Harris County, and he said, I'm going to destroy the criminal justice system from within. And I think he did a pretty good job of it until he was defeated on re-election. He was defeated in the primary. And so I think we're now getting to the point where we've got politicians from that side of the electorate that are in a box. They know what they're doing is wrong, but they can't get out of the box because they've made all these promises, and they told their supporters that they've been mistreated. And if they change and say they were wrong, well, look at all the money we spent on this change system. And they would immediately have 2 or 3 people announce they're running against them. So I think a lot of what we're seeing right now is we see people that are in a box and they're just trying to figure out a way to save their own skin. And they're not really worried about how we correct this thing, because they want to save themselves. But what I've also said is this isn't sustainable. It will have a correction. And so I think we're seeing the correction coming now, and you're starting to see the mayors come out and say, we got to do something. We need a state of emergency on crime. Well, that's coming from groups that are that are from that same electorate. And so you're starting to see that group come out and say, we've got to change what we're doing.
Well, I mean, I guess I don't understand to a certain extent, how were they able to convince, a number of lower courts? I know that this is always typically, once it gets to a higher court, it's been kicked back down. But, how do you convince a lower court that a concept that is explicitly referenced in the Constitution as a constitutional right, I mean, i.e. bail, that somehow that is now unconstitutional?
Well, let's use the O'Donnell case as the example, because I think that was the first case where it caught on. And I think I'm critical of Judge Lee Rosenthal, who created so many opinions and cost people their lives. But it's hard to be critical of her when they file suit. The sitting district attorney files an affidavit saying she agrees that bail is unconstitutional in their county. It's hard to be critical of Judge Rosenthal when the sheriff files an affidavit in the case saying he agrees that bail, as it's being done in Harris County, is unconstitutional. And then if there's one or more judges that ultimately file affidavits in the litigation saying they agree. So it looks like you've got all these people agreeing that bail is unconstitutional. And so she swallows the Kool-Aid, and she thinks that she's going to have a legacy in this case. Well, you know what? Let's fast forward to today. She's got a legacy, but it's the opposite of what she wanted, because now we've got a federal court not only reversing her multiple times, reversed the first case, issued a stay on the second preliminary injunction she entered, saying that it was highly likely the judge is going to win. Then there was a settlement And the only reason why Harris County is where it is right now on misdemeanor bonds is because of a settlement. Now the Fifth Circuit has ruled, they've reversed her key rulings on the first case, and they've now held that that case should have never been filed in federal court to begin with. And yet the settlement continues because nobody will approach her about vacating the opinion. And she just dismissed the Russell case, and she dismissed it not on abstention grounds, which was one of the rulings the Fifth Circuit made, but on mootness. And that gives her the wiggle room to say, well, the O'Donnell case, the consent decree can continue. She's wrong on that. She's wrong. And I think that the legacy that she now has is a direct result. She swallowed the Kool-Aid and she was wrong. But that's the only case. Every other case that's gone up to the Court of Appeals has been reversed and sent back.
Right.
And then the Fifth Circuit has just really taken a really strong position on that. And it's pending on, there's a case from the Fifth Circuit called Daves versus Dallas County, which is pending on a petition for cert at the U.S. Supreme Court on the issue of not abatement, but of
the abstention,
your abstention, and for mootness. And so that's we should have an opinion on that, or a decision on the petition for cert in the next couple of weeks.
Well, hopefully it'll come out in a positive way for the bail industry and bail.
Look, the bail industry should not be scared of that case.
Right.
If the current Supreme Court accepts that case on on abstention, we should look at that as the Supreme Court has taken that opportunity to get rid of this litigation nationwide. I mean, you can go, if you look at my article, there's some opinions that are cited over medical care from California a long time ago that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and it's Kennedy who wrote the opinion. Well, the Supreme Court we have today is much further right than when Kennedy was on the Supreme Court. I think that the current Supreme Court would reverse that case today because the dissent is now the majority. The dissent in that case was, we had two opinions. One of them was saying we can't advocate for the release of tens of thousands of convicted criminals. And today that, I think they would reverse that case. They might get rid of this litigation nationwide. So I think the two choices, that's what they'll do, or they'll just deny the petition for cert. But I am expecting them to deny the petition.
So that sort of gets into the phase one part of your article. The headline on that section was "Releasing More Criminals Will Make Us Safer." I mean, and this seems akin to the argument that jails and prisons themselves cause crime. Which I heard one bondsman tell a legislative committee, years ago that if this was true, then they should abolish all the jails so there'd be no crime. But so as silly as this sounds, or stupid, what was the basic argument for reducing crime by releasing criminals?
Well, it's kind of hard to imagine nowadays, but 8 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, there were actually articles written saying there's this study that says if we don't prosecute misdemeanors, then there will be less misdemeanor crime. I mean, things that just defy common sense. I mean, I think the last year or last 2 years have actually proven that all those concepts are just absolutely false. But this concept that, this phase one for our urban cities is, it starts with, hey, we'll be safer by releasing more criminals. Now, the problem is it was always a lie, because the reason why this started in California was because they had overcrowding in the jail. They had no political will to build more jails. And so they had the federal court ordered them to reduce their jail population. And so since they weren't going to build more jails, they pushed them to the counties. The counties decided to release them. So this was never about you're really going to be safer. This was all about a political or a PR campaign to justify what they were doing. But if you look back, I mean, everything would say they didn't believe that. They knew there would be more crime. They just were trying to get the public to be okay with it. And, I did a podcast with a DA just a couple of weeks ago, and she said she didn't believe that there was a political will even today to build more jails. And I'm like, until they build more capacity, they're stuck in this criminal cycle. And because that's their problem. Their problem is they don't have the capacity they need.
Well, yeah, I mean, the population of the country has risen by 40% over the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
You're going to, even if crime stays just steady, you're going to need more space for an increased population size.
Yes, I think the governor Schwarzenegger set aside some money to build jails or build more prisons, and they just didn't do it. And so the political will right now is they won't build more jails, which then that limits their options. And in limiting their options, I think that that makes all these things that we're seeing. Then you see what's happening. I mean, you knew crime was going to go up. I mean, you're going to see the same thing in New York because they're going to close their prison or their big jail. And so they're going to have a lot less capacity. So no matter what reforms they're making, they've rolled back bail reform 4 times. When they close that and they have a lot less capacity, then crime is going to go up again, because when you don't have room for prisoners and you release them, what do you think? What do they see that as? They see that as a green light to commit more crime. And you see gangs, you see organized crime, you see career criminals step in and make a fortune. And that's what's going to happen. That's what's happened in New York. That's what happens anywhere you see this argument. If we release more criminals, we'll be safer. No, we won't. No, we won't.
And I did a couple of points on that. One, I watched you on a forum, I don't know, a year and a half ago or something in Texas. I forget who's the civil rights lawyer that makes the news a lot that had put that on.
Oh, Ben Crump.
Yeah, Ben Crump. And you were on a panel there, and you pointed out that, hey, we can't just abandon prosecuting misdemeanor crime, because misdemeanor crime is the breeding ground or the training ground for felony crimes. And of course, you were booed by that particular audience. But I wonder if you could talk about, one of the reasons, I mean, I guess we prosecute misdemeanor crimes, as a deterrent, but because nobody starts off robbing banks. I mean, every now and then you get somebody, but as a general rule, you start off shoplifting, and you move up the chain of criminal behavior as a misdemeanor if you don't stop that when it's at a lower level.
Well, I haven't really set out arguing just misdemeanor crime, but the reason why I've talked about it is because the reforms in Harris County were for misdemeanors.
Right.
And so I've always been talking about the consequences that we've seen in Harris County, and they were a result to the misdemeanor courts. But I think you can now look at multiple places. You can look in California, because they do a simple release mechanism for misdemeanor arrestees. And you can look at Harris County, and you can look at other places. You can say, you can look at Coleman County, Alabama, that had to live under a similar preliminary injunction for 5 years while they went through the appeal until they got it reversed. Every one of those places have seen the same thing: 80% failure to appear rates. No ability to hold people accountable when they fail to appear. And the reaction from the criminal element has been the same every time. Well, this is a green light to commit more crime. And so, like you said, I believe this is today's misdemeanors is tomorrow's felonies. If you're not going to prosecute them, then you're just going to have more crime across the spectrum.
Well, and a lot of people, what they see is oh, this person was charged and they were charged with stealing a car, and now they're serving, 7 years for stealing a car. They don't really look at this and go, well, there's multiple parts of this. One, that person has an extensive prior criminal history. Two, there's the deterrent value from punishing that person to society at large. If you impose a harsh sentence on someone who gets caught and convicted of a charge, that is supposed to deter other people from engaging in that same behavior.
Well, let me make 2 points there. The first point is our criminal justice system is based on the concept that we only impose the amount of pressure on you to get you to change course. And so that's different for a first-time offender than it is for a second-time offender. But these reforms, where we have to treat everybody the same because it's pretrial release, we're treating first-time offenders the same as people that have been arrested 7, 8, 10, 12, 15 times. And that destroys the deterrent element of our criminal justice system. And so we can't, these reforms are doing the opposite of what we've done historically.
Well, one of the, and this kind of goes in another area I was thinking about, was the same group that opposes, or same groups or coalition that kind of opposes bail, or the bail reformers, they're also opposed to things like private prisons. And so one solution you could have, if you need more prison capacity, is task the private sector to create that capacity. And
well, let me make my second point. My second point is, with the benefit of time, we were told originally, don't worry about property crimes. They're all insured. And so there's no real victim here. And so what we found is, if you live in an urban city and your business is burned, well, when you get your insurance, you're not going to bill back if you get your insurance. And if you don't get insurance because it was a riot, well, then you're not going to have anything to bill back with. But the problem is, on top of that, if people want to move, and sell their property, their value of their property has gone way down. And so I think the consequences of not prosecuting misdemeanor crime is probably the basis of this article as you think it through all the different phases you go through. But I think that's one of the reasons why we were thinking, we've got to explain to people why this is such a bad decision, because it doesn't create less crime. It doesn't create you don't get any of the benefits. And I question whether they even believe that, because this was a PR stunt to sell why we're going to put fewer people in jail in California, because we decided that we weren't going to build more jails.
Well, we have other things to spend money on rather than, actual public safety.
Well, but they've been ordered by the courts to release up. They had 200% capacity in their jails, and they were ordered to go down to 137.5% capacity. And so that was tens of thousands of people that had to be released. Sure. And that's terrible. I mean,
yeah, for those of us in smaller areas, I mean, I know that Harris County is the fourth largest, county in the country. And so you're used to having these thousands of people, but, and I think at one point in time, Los Angeles County had, 13,000 inmates in its county jail system. Whereas, some county like that I work out of, we have 700 people in our county jail at any given time. So the idea of releasing thousands of people back in the community, and these are people that are prone to or disposed to commit crimes already. And they're just going to go back to that.
I'm glad you raised Harris County as an example, because of all the reforms that we've seen in Harris County on misdemeanors, and they've kind of bled over a little bit on the felonies. But what are the consequences of that? Their jail is full right now, and it's full of very dangerous people because they don't hold misdemeanor people. And so crime is going up. And, we've got a DA or a candidate running for DA who's Soros funded, I'm sure, who's running to the left of the current sitting DA, who's also a Democrat, saying that it's the bail industry's fault. And I'm like, how can it be the bail industry's fault when, as crime has increased, you've used the private bail industry less and less, and you've quit using it for misdemeanors, and crime has skyrocketed? What happened is you've given up on accountability. And you know what? I mean, this sounds really cold, and I don't mean it to sound this really cold, but, a woman was killed by her husband, who was released on a personal bond after she filed charges on him for family violence. She wasn't killed by the private industry. She was killed by the state with a personal bond. There's an 80-something-year-old grandma who was killed on the parking lot of Walgreens in Houston, Texas. She was just trying to buy a birthday card for one of her grandchildren. And the person who killed her was on 2 felony PR bonds, free bonds. She was not killed by the private industry. She was not killed by someone out on a private industry bond. She was killed because they were released for free, and we gave up on accountability. The reason why crime is increasing in Harris County is contrary to what they're being told by this person running for DA, is that we've given up on accountability and we're using more personal bonds when we should be relying upon the private industry.
My son, he went to KU, chemical engineering degree. He works down in Texas now. And so they live in Baytown. He and his fiance live in Baytown, and she works in Houston, and he works in Beaumont. But one of the things he was telling me was, as they were driving from Houston into whatever county Baytown is in, and I don't know what it is, but there was a big billboard that said, "You're not in Harris County anymore. We prosecute crime here," which the fact that the next county over is putting a sign up, to tell people coming into that county, we're going to prosecute you if you commit crimes, not like this other county that you were just in. It's shameful, I guess, is just one way to look. I mean,
the first time I ever saw that was on Facebook. There was one of the police departments for a surrounding county posted a story about, they arrested somebody for property crimes, and they were taken to jail, and they were like, "This isn't the way to the Harris County jail." And they're like, "You're not in Harris County. You're in our county where we prosecute crime and we back the blue." And they're like, "Oh crap, we're in the wrong county. How did we do this?" And that's telling you a lot. I mean, it should be telling the voters a lot. I mean, criminals know where they can get away with crime. And if you live somewhere where the politicians are going to allow them to get away with crime, they're going to go there. And that's one of the reasons why we have crime increasing in Harris County. We're trying half measures to reduce it, because the politicians can't admit that they were wrong in spending $100 million to implement a settlement that should have never been entered into, because the federal court said the federal case should have never been filed in the first place.
How much jail capacity could you build for $100 million?
That is a very good point. That is a very good point. But, let's don't be too critical of the jails, because building the capacity, you got to find people to work there. And with this attack on the blue and the attack on law enforcement and defund the police, it's harder and harder to find people to work in the jail. And so you may have the capacity, but you may not be able to use it because you can't find anybody that'll work there.
Well, and you have to have enough people working in a jail where it's a safe environment for everyone. I mean, that's one of the complaints about Rikers Island is that it's an unsafe jail, but largely because it's understaffed. I mean, if they had the staff to control the population that they had, it wouldn't be the same situation that it is.
Yeah, but I'm going to say the people that are advocating for closing Rikers are kind of similar to the people in California. And what they're doing is, we're going to reduce the capacity, and that's going to open them up to federal litigation, which is going to force them to release more criminals. And we don't care about the consequences. That's what we want. And so right. I would caution, New York. I mean, think how much better they would be if they just closed down a third of it and renovated that third, and then did the same thing moved them over, and it wouldn't cost them the same thing as building a new jail. But they're not even talking about that. I mean, they're talking about closing it and then having local jails, and they're going to have a third of the capacity, and that's a recipe for disaster, and it's a recipe for disaster on public safety.
So let's go to phase 2 of your article, where you talk about the pretrial criminal justice reforms paralyzed the courts. And I agree that the courts can't function when people don't show up. It's the basic way that you've got to be able to confront witnesses, and you've got to be able to have the defendant there. But I think it does more than just paralyze the courts. Victims don't call the police because nothing will happen. And after all, snitches get stitches. Police are not engaging in proactive policing. It's the Ferguson effect on steroids, or the Floyd effect, as we're referring to it now. Milton Friedman once said that there was a surefire way to predict the consequences of a government social program adopted to achieve worthy ends. So find out what the well-meaning, publicly interested persons who advocated its adoption and expected it to accomplish, and then reverse those expectations, and you'll have an actual accurate prediction of how public policy works. But no, talk about how this is paralyzing the courts, and the consequence of the courts not being able to function.
Well, we have this perfect storm right before COVID of, let's push for all these things. Let's push for criminal justice reform. They were getting some success, but not a lot. But then we were hit with COVID. And, I like to say during COVID, we got to see a whole bunch of proposed bail reform on steroids, and we saw the consequences of it, and it wasn't good. But so we had all these pushes for, we need to have alternatives to the private industry. And, probably the best response I have to that is there was a mayor recently on a News Nation town hall, and she's a former judge. And she said until you have an alternative to the private industry that has the same accountability and the same low failure to appear rate, then you don't have an alternative. And so what I would say is, we have all these pushes for alternatives, and there's been states, counties, regions that have implemented alternatives. But the problem is, there's a reason why the private industry has been around for 200 years. It does one thing, it does it very good. And just like this Democrat mayor has finally come to realize, until you get an alternative that has the same accountability, the same appearance rate, you don't have an alternative. And these alternatives that have been tried have proved to be disastrous. And disastrous because you have an 80% failure to appear rate. Like you said, criminal cases are not like anything else. You have to be put on hold. That case has to stop until they return, whether that's hours, days, months, or never. That case can't go forward until they come back, because they have a right to confront the witnesses against them. And so we have the same number of cases on average being added to the criminal justice conveyor belt that have to get through the criminal justice system every day, every month, every year. And if you are adding the same number, but you're slowing down the conveyor belt with obstacles, then you're building a backlog. These reforms, along with COVID, have destroyed the backlogs, the ability of the courts to function. And as a result, we've kind of had a lot of de facto decriminalization. I mean, that's the unspoken thing. We don't talk about it. We have cases being dismissed at alarming numbers, and criminals see that as, okay, I got away with it. I mean, I looked at last year in August for Harris County Misdemeanor Court. They have a report monthly on their dispositions. For that month, over 90% of the cases disposed had been dismissed. Why do we even have criminal courts if they're going to dismiss 90% of the cases? I mean, if you're going to dismiss 90% of the cases, you're picking on somebody in my book, but no, you're not. You're preventing your system from collapsing, and that's not a good alternative. Do you want to know why crime is increasing? Crime is increasing because we've taken away all consequences of crime.
So the dismissals, I mean, are they just, a period of time has passed after the failure to appear and we just dismiss, or are we, getting people back in on the warrants and at some point basically getting them back in there, and then, no, there's no witness, and so we'll dismiss at that stage?
Well, I think it goes the spectrum, but I think part of it is, okay, you are arrested, you get a bond, and you don't show up. Well, you don't have to be there to have your case dismissed.
Right.
Anything else, you got to be there. You got to be there to plea. And if you're not going to come and nobody's going to go get you, and they can't force anybody to go get you from another county because it's just a misdemeanor. Like in California, I had a DA tell me they don't even extradite between counties on misdemeanors anymore. They won't even arrest you for a misdemeanor, a failure to appear warrant. So, I mean, our good friends, the criminal elements, see that for what it is. It's a green light to commit more crime. And, I spoke to the DA from Coleman County in the Schultz versus Alabama case yesterday, and he told me, for the 5 years they lived under that preliminary injunction where their hands were tied, that's what they found. I mean, it was slow at first, but after 6 months, a year, the criminals were like, arrest me. I'm going to be released. This isn't going to stop me. I'm just going to go back doing it. And you know what? He said that was true until the Court of Appeals reversed it.
Well, they talk to each other. I mean, it's just a small subset of the population that commits these crimes, and they know each other. They met in jail. They know each other from the streets. They know each other, and they talk. I mean, yeah, I got out. They know what's going on. I mean,
well, I heard an analogy saying that in any given big city, we have a city within a city, and it's the criminal element. So we have a small group of criminals living within the big city. Those are the ones that are committing a substantial amount of the crime. But what I like to argue is there's a gray area between the two cities. And those people that live there are saying every day, well, am I going to join the law-abiding part of the city, or am I going to join the criminal part of the city? And right now, the criminal city is growing by leaps and bounds because the gray area is saying, God, I don't see any consequences for doing this, so I'm going to join. And that's what we have to address. And so we have to address it, and we have to change this mindset. And until we do that, and I think the change in the mindset has to go all the way from felonies down to misdemeanors, then we're going to see crime starting to go down. And I make this argument. People tell me I'm crazy, but until we have crime going down, we don't have enough capacity in our prisons.
No, I agree completely. I mean, there's been several articles that talk about that, despite the large incarceration level in the United States, I mean, and it is large, we don't have an over-incarceration problem. We have a crime problem. Mm-hmm. People will try and argue you can't incarcerate your way out of that, but it's like, yeah, you can.
Yeah, you can.
There's a select number of people.
They say we have a larger percentage of people in jail than any other part of the world. Well, we have the largest percentage of drugs being sent to our country than anywhere else in the world. They're all sending their drugs to us. So how would it be anything but? If we're going to have law enforcement, we're going to have public safety, we're going to have a larger percentage in jail because they're sending all their drugs to us.
No, I agree. All right. So phase 3 in your article, mass shoplifting and ensuing societal chaos. And obviously we've all seen the news stories, results of organized theft mobs, looting stores. Chicago actually just was in the news today, proposing to open its own, government-run grocery stores in these food deserts that have been caused by this, which they'll just be looted as well. Mm-hmm. So talk about this. I mean, it's not just property crimes in these areas. I mean, granted, mass shoplifting looks bad, but that's not the only type of crime that's going on in these areas.
No, but that's the one that's catching the news. And so when you're looking, okay, so we go back to California. California had a proposition where they changed certain felonies to misdemeanors. So, and the argument was, hey, this is going to make it better for these people. They can find jobs. It won't be such a penalty to them. They won't spend as much in time in jail, but there'll be consequences because it'll still be a misdemeanor. But then we have, and that was why I was so critical of these right-wing think tanks that supported it. I'm like, were any of you thinking about consequences or thinking about possibilities? Because then we have some DAs in our urban cities that come in and say, okay, we're no longer going to prosecute these misdemeanors. And one of them was theft under $950. Well, I mean, if you're giving everybody a pass on theft under $950, what would you expect the result to be? I mean, organized crime has just figured out a way to make a killing on this. I mean, stores have started closing because they can't withstand $25,000 a day in shoplifting. I mean, I can't withstand $25,000 a day shoplifting. I can't withstand $5,000 a day of shoplifting. And I don't know any store that can. But then it starts getting worse, and then it starts, well, let's go to the jewelry stores, and then let's go to, becomes a problem on public safety for drugs and selling in your neighborhoods. And then, look at San Francisco at the federal building there that's named after the former Speaker of the House. And they issued something to their employees saying, don't come to work to the federal building anymore. It's not safe in that neighborhood. So they're wanting all of the federal employees at the Nancy Pelosi federal building to work from home because they can't provide a safe environment to walk from their car in the parking lot to the door into the building. That's where we are. And, this is where we are now. The last phase is kind of, what does the future hold if we don't change it? And but I mean, we're in the middle of phase 3. We are right smack in the middle of it. And so really the question is, are we going to go into the final phase?
How is this even remotely politically popular? I don't know. I mean, I would think, and you're a lawyer, so you can, give this a ling-a-ling. Do these shopkeepers, do these retailers in these areas, do they not have a claim against the government? I mean, they're not enforcing the laws that are on the books.
Yes, I think that's a good argument. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see somebody try that in an argument. Because, we've seen some charitable bail funds being sued when they release dangerous people on bond. And so I wouldn't be surprised. But, the problem with that is you're in California. The politics are very left. Right. That would be a conservative approach. And so that would be looked down upon. And probably, I'm afraid that our courts are so political at the moment, or they have such a political push on them. So I don't know if that would have a much favorable rule. But I mean, look, it's hurting people. I mean, if you've worked second generation, own a store, y'all have worked so long to build up the value in your business and then have it partially burned, then you get a settlement, you don't want to rebuild, and you can't even sell it for what you can't sell it. You have to settle for half of what you thought it was worth. I mean, how's that not destroying everything that we think is right in our country? I mean, it just creates utter chaos. And, one of the reasons why I think it's not sustainable is because our country's never been the victim. We've always had people that rally to support people. And so we'll have vigilante justice if the government won't provide justice. And you can see California now, they're passing a bill supposedly that allows the state to fine you if you step in on a shoplifting. So, there's some big debate about what that bill really means, but I'm like, are we really at the point where we're going to penalize the people that are standing up to shoplifters?
Well, I think there was an argument that the retailers themselves could be in that same article could be fined, $15,000, $18,000 a year if they didn't provide security in their stores. Like, well, I mean, that's the death of retail.
Yes, it is the death of retail. And some, I think you even posted that on a Facebook page I saw that said that. But yeah, but it's what the government is doing is we're shoving off security, public safety to if you want somebody to come to your business, then you have to provide it. But the reality is, if the government's not going to provide it, then public's going to just shop online. Retail is going to die. But that's the reason why I don't think it's sustainable. I mean, we're not going to have all of the urban centers in our country die, because then what are we going to do to those people that can't move? Or how are they even going to get assistance when all the taxes that they were getting from businesses have gone away? And so that's why I have hope. It's not sustainable.
Well, and I think, well, let's get into phase 4 just a little bit. The final, the where we're headed with this if we don't make any changes, the death loop, aka bankruptcy. You specifically referenced the San Francisco commercial property rate. Occupancy rate was, I think, what, 32%, something in that range,
like 38%, but 30 in the 30s.
Right. I mean, well below 50% occupancy rate on their commercial property.
Yeah, 31.8%.
So, I mean, you talk about it in the article that, how is the city of San Francisco going to provide services if their tax base gets eroded to that degree? Because, I mean, one of the arguments we've had on tax relief arguments here in Kansas is, what should you be taxed on? Should it be your occupancy? So as a landlord, if you own commercial property, should you be taxed, should your property tax be based on what you could earn on it or what you actually are earning on it? So, I mean, I get these questionnaires on my billing. How much is your rent? Send us in this thing so we can properly assess your taxes. And there were a couple of lawsuits over, big box stores. What should we be charging taxes based on what the rent is, or what happens if it's just an empty warehouse? Should we be charging taxes based on it being non-used? So I don't know what it is in California, but there's still some correlation there between the activity of that commercial building and how much tax revenue it generates. That's a large bulk of city revenue between sales tax, which you're killing your retail, and your property tax, and you're killing your commercial property. How do you provide, how do you even remove the trash, much less provide things, like law enforcement protection?
Well, we're destroying our inner cities. I mean, the commercial industry calls it a death loop when a commercial building gets to a level, to a certain extent, where it no longer is bringing enough revenue in through leasing to provide or to cover the payment for the building itself. And so, I mean, I was kind of surprised to see some articles talking about that situation, in that realtors will steer companies away from those buildings. Well, I mean, if you have a 31% occupancy rate in San Francisco, you're not making enough money to cover your overhead. You're not making enough money to cover the loan on your building. And we're seeing more of that. I mean, the average occupancy rate across the country is coming down, and except for like in states where people are moving, like Texas and Florida. And that's not sustainable. And, what's the impact of that? Well, the first impact is the building declares bankruptcy. Well, if they declare bankruptcy, how are you going to get your taxes on that? They've declared bankruptcy. And then if they declare bankruptcy and your revenue from your tax revenue goes down from all the people that have moved, you're not getting income taxes as much, you're not getting property tax, you're not getting sales taxes. Well, then you're no longer able to provide the revenue or get the revenue that you need to provide essential services for the people in your town, in your urban city. You can borrow money for a little bit, but then you're going to reach the point of no return where the city is going to be facing bankruptcy. And right now, if there was a Republican president and San Francisco declared bankruptcy, would there be a government bailout of that? No. So, I mean, that's the reason why you're seeing mayors come out and say crime is at the point we've got to do something about it. And I don't think it's the crime itself, although I think there's an element of that. I think they're seeing the handwriting on the wall. They're seeing that their city is going to be stressed very heavily on revenue and to be able to just provide essential services. And so you're starting to see them speak out. And I think that's where it's going to come from, is this can't continue. This is going to kill our citizens. It's already killing them, but this is going to make it where we can't even help them anymore. So,
well, and I think it's worse than you're putting on here. I don't think we're limited to just the cities. I mean, obviously this is going to impact cities like San Francisco, to provide services as their tax base deteriorates, but very much like the 2008 housing crash, this doesn't stop there. How many banks have huge segments of their loan portfolios tied up in these commercial real estate properties? How many pension funds have invested in
Yes.
these, multi-million-dollar
Yeah.
properties? What happens to these banks when the landlords simply walk away and default on the loans? What's the ripple effect through the entire economy of the country and, in all honesty, the world?
The first time I ever saw this issue where I thought, hey, this can be an issue going forward was several years ago. A bondsman called me and said, hey, the Chamber of Commerce is having a forum for all these different groups to come in and talk about issues that we want to address maybe at the next legislative session. And so, there were a lot of economic development boards there. And then there was me and another bondsman. And when we talked about crime and that bail reform and how we need to be careful about bad bail reform, I can't tell you, as they went around the room, how many other economic development groups were saying, well, I'm really interested in what the bail people have to say. I'm really interested in crime. And if you look at that, that was years ago, a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago. And now fast forward, it's even a bigger issue today. And so, when it first got raised on our as an issue for us, I was like, gosh, I hadn't even thought about that. Well, now it's on everybody's thoughts because it's a bigger and bigger issue and it's a bigger and bigger danger to our urban cities.
Well, we had Eric Granoff from AIA on the podcast here, I don't know, a couple months ago, and he was trying to do some mathematical calculations, and he had done an estimate or had an estimate that it was like crime was costing us like $5.4 trillion, and so it was 20 some percent of GDP. At some point, and the consequences for that. I mean, there's collateral damage from that. That sort of money being pulled out of the economy. There's got to be a tipping point for that at some point that causes all the dominoes to fall.
Well, but if you think about it, it's costing trillions of dollars. Well, that means that organized crime is making trillions of dollars.
Well,
even if it's half of that, it's still trillions of dollars.
Right.
And you could make the argument, and I've even said this, what would our elected officials be doing differently if they were in the pocket of organized crime with these bail reform measures? How could they benefit organized crime more than they already are? Trillions of dollars. Could we make it more trillions of dollars? I think, that's why, you look at it and you go, why are we supporting this? Well, I think it's a trap they set for themselves and they don't know how to get out of it. But what could they be doing more to make it more beneficial for organized crime? And I don't know anything else they could do to make it better.
Well, obviously one of the things they could do is revert back to the previous system that was working. But, my fear is that the reaction on this will not be a return to traditional bail in these areas. Rather, it will be to adopt a regimen of preventive detention, which will become increasingly harsh over time.
Well, I would say that the reformers are not having much luck in the legislatures.
Right.
And so where they were having luck was in the courts, and they still are having some luck. I think in LA, nobody would defend the bail system. So the court ordered them to go back to a zero bail system currently, but that's not because of the legal arguments. It's still politics. I think the courts cases are starting to settle down. Like Fifth Circuit has really gotten rid of that type of litigation, said it can't be filed. And so I think you're going to see that in the more common sense circuits that's going to build. And you're still going to have some outliers. But the problem with the outliers is, like we've said so many times, it's just not sustainable. And at some point it will break. And when it does, it will break really bad against those people. Because, we've got some artificial things holding it up, like right before the last election, 2 weeks before, we had all the politicians from the left come out kind of in sync saying crime isn't really a problem. These is just a left-wing talking point. And it's not a real issue. And you know what? They made it through. They skated through. But now we've got the NAACP of Oakland saying crime is a problem, that we need a state of emergency on crime. You've got the DA saying the old talking points. Oh, they're just using right-wing talking points. It's terrible to see from the NAACP. And then you got the regional NAACP coming out saying, no, it is a problem. What they're saying is correct, and you're wrong. And you're starting to see that more and more. And as we have more groups from the left agreeing that we need to act on crime, that's going to destroy the motif or the facade that has been created, because they just don't have an answer. And so when that facade falls, it's going to have a lot of damage to those politicians.
Well, which means they have a vested interest in keeping on. They don't want to admit that they were wrong. They don't want to, or they want to try and turn around and gaslight you. Oh, no, I never said defund the police. I never said bail reform. It was all.
Yeah, that's my favorite. Oh, I never said that. Well, let's go to the tape. It's like those commercials where they're like, throw the red flag and let's go to the tape and see what you really said.
So how do we in the bail bond industry walk that tightrope between wholesale release, which you get some of that in Harris County, Los Angeles, and wholesale detention, like you essentially have at the federal level? It can be awfully hard to be in the middle of those two extremes.
Well, we can't let that be the argument. This cannot become an argument of release detain, because like you've said, the federal system, they detain, approximately 75% of the people arrested. Right. That can't happen in the state system. That's actually a trap. If we were to use that system or go to it, it becomes creates chaos, and we can't sustain it. We have no choice but to simply release large numbers of people because we don't have the capacity to keep them in jail. So that would be a trap. And we have to point out that. We have to be very cautious when, we're not building capacity. We have to point out this is a trap. This is a trap that the left is setting for you. And then we have to say, look, let's go back to what works. And I don't think that the compromise is we're only going to focus on violent crime. I think we need to go back and we need to focus on what's right for the people who are arrested. We've given up on drug users right now. We're just letting them commit overdoses left and right, and we're not doing anything to them. I spoke to Matt Gentry, who's the sheriff of Coleman County, yesterday on a podcast, and they defeated a preliminary injunction after living under it for 5 years. They won at the Court of Appeals, and they went back to the system of bail that worked for them. And he said it took them 6 months of showing the criminal elements that they meant business, and for their mindset to change and things to start reverting back to what they should be. And so I think that gives hope to all of these counties or all these jurisdictions that are seeing such chaos. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. And, whether you like us or not, that light has a big component of the private industry, because as the mayor said on News Nation Town Hall, until you have an alternative that has the same accountability and the same low failure to appear rate, you don't have an alternative. And so we need to recognize that, and we need to use the bail industry more because it works. It's the best at getting people to court. It's the best at getting justice to victims, and will return us sooner to the normalcy that we crave so bad right now.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Hopefully we can get to that stage, get some return back to sanity on these criminal justice issues, because it's just crazy what you see on this, and that people are willing to make excuses for. The Jean Valjean, Les Mis version of crime is all about, these people are just stealing to feed their families. No, they're not. So thank you very much, Ken, for taking the time to talk to us today. It's a great article. I encourage anyone to read the article, also to listen to your podcast. Actually, I was listening to the latest episode here right before we started ours. So it's a great podcast. It's a great resource for the bail industry. I do want to thank you for all the time and effort you put into on this. The industry really needs people like you to be out there on these issues.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. I apologize. I just got a haircut, and I got a bad haircut. And so I've been staring at my hair going, first of all, I've got all these natural highlights that I used to not have, but that's just a consequence.
It's summertime. Yeah. And gray. Exactly. So,
but thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks, Ken.
Join us again next time for the Bail in the Midwest podcast.